The sky above the mountains was no longer peaceful. For centuries, the rugged borderlands between Pakistan and Afghanistan had witnessed traders, travelers, and tribes moving freely across valleys and passes. Families on both sides shared language, culture, and blood. But now, smoke rose where laughter once echoed, and the wind carried the distant sound of artillery. The fragile relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan had finally broken under the weight of mistrust, politics, and old wounds that never truly healed. It began with a single incident along the disputed border. Each government blamed the other for violating sovereignty. News channels on both sides broadcast fiery speeches. Soldiers were deployed. Villages near the frontier emptied as families fled with whatever they could carry. In Pakistan, mothers held their children close, whispering prayers for safety. In Afghanistan, fathers stood silently on rooftops, staring toward the horizon, fearing what the next sunrise would bring. What had once been tense diplomacy turned into open confrontation, and the border became a line of fire instead of a line on a map. As days turned into weeks, the war intensified. Fighter jets roared across the sky, and tanks rolled through dusty terrain. Communication lines were cut. Trade stopped. The markets that once sold Afghan dry fruits in Pakistani cities and Pakistani textiles in Afghan towns fell silent. The economies of both nations trembled. Yet the deepest damage was not to buildings or roads, it was to the hearts of ordinary people. Children who once dreamed of becoming doctors, teachers, and engineers now learned to recognize the sounds of different weapons. Schools closed, and playgrounds stood empty. Amid the chaos, there were stories of courage and humanity. In a small village near the border, a Pakistani doctor treated wounded civilians regardless of nationality. He refused to ask which side they belonged to. "Pain has no passport," he said. On the other side, an Afghan journalist risked her life to report the truth, urging leaders to choose dialogue over destruction. She reminded the world that both countries shared more than conflict, they shared history, culture, and faith. Her words spread across social media, giving hope to those who felt voiceless. The international community watched with concern. Leaders called for ceasefire talks, fearing that the conflict could destabilize the entire region. Diplomats worked behind closed doors, trying to calm tempers and reopen communication. Meanwhile, soldiers on both sides, many young and barely out of training, began to question why they were fighting people who looked and spoke like their own relatives. Some had grandparents born on the other side of the border. The realization weighed heavily on them. One cold night, after a particularly fierce exchange, something unexpected happened. A temporary ceasefire was declared to allow humanitarian aid to reach affected villages. During that pause, soldiers from both sides stood quietly across from each other. No shots were fired. In that silence, they heard not commands, but the cries of displaced families and the rumble of trucks carrying food and medicine. For a brief moment, the war seemed small compared to the suffering it had created. Negotiations slowly gained momentum. It was not easy, trust had been shattered, and anger ran deep. But the cost of continuing the war was too high. Mothers demanded peace. Business owners demanded stability. Students demanded their futures back. After weeks of intense dialogue, a formal ceasefire agreement was signed. The guns fell silent, though the scars remained. Rebuilding was harder than fighting. Homes had to be reconstructed, roads repaired, and confidence restored. Yet something had changed. The war had shown both Pakistan and Afghanistan that destruction brings no victory. True strength lies not in overpowering a neighbor, but in understanding them. Community leaders from both countries began organizing cross-border peace conferences. Youth groups exchanged letters and art, promising never to let hatred define their generation. In the end, the war became a painful lesson written in smoke and tears. It reminded the world that neighboring nations are bound by geography and destiny. When one suffers, the other cannot truly prosper. And so, from the ashes of conflict, a fragile but sincere hope emerged, that Pakistan and Afghanistan would choose dialogue over division, cooperation over conflict, and peace over war. Don't stop here, the next story might just blow your mind. Subscribe, hit like, and share this with anyone who craves heart-pounding suspense and unforgettable twists.